James and the Giant Peach, Chapter 28. We're getting close to the end. One by one, the travelers came out again onto the top of the peach and gazed carefully around. The moon was still shining as brightly as ever, and there were still plenty of huge, shimmering cloud mountains on all sides. But there were no cloudmen in sight right now. "The peach is leaking!" shouted the old green grasshopper, peering over the side. "It's full of holes and the juice is dripping out everywhere." "That does it!" cried the earthworm. "If the peach is leaking, then we shall surely sink." "Don't be ridiculous," the centipede told him. "We're not in the water now." "Oh, look!" shouted the ladybug. "Look, look, look over there!" Everybody swung around to look. In the distance and directly ahead of them, they now saw a most extraordinary sight. It was a kind of arch, a colossal curvy-shaped thing that reached high up into the sky and came down again at both ends. The ends were resting upon a huge flat cloud that was as big as a desert. "Now what in the world is that?" asked James. "It's a bridge. It's an enormous hoop cut in half. It's a giant horseshoe standing upside down." "Stop me if I'm wrong," murmured the centipede, going white in the face, "but those might not be cloudmen. But might those not be cloudmen climbing all over it?" There was a dreadful silence. The peach floated closer and closer. "They are cloudmen. There are hundreds of them. Thousands, millions." "I don't want to hear about it," shrieked the poor blind earthworm. "I'd rather be on the end of a fish hook and used as bait than come up against those terrible creatures again." "I'd rather be fried alive and eaten," wailed the old green grasshopper. "Please keep quiet," whispered James. It's our only hope." They crouched very still on top of the peach, staring at the cloudmen. The whole surface of the cloud was literally swarming with them, and there were hundreds more up above, climbing about on the monstrous, crazy arch. "But what is that thing?" whispered the ladybug. "And what are they doing to it?" "I don't care what they're doing to it," the centipede said. "I'm not staying up here. Goodbye." But the rest of them were too frightened or too hypnotized by the whole affair to make a move. "Do you know what?" James whispered. "What?" they said. "What?" "That enormous arch. They seem to be painting it. They've got pots of paint and big brushes. Look!" And he was quite right. The travelers were close enough now to see that this was exactly what the cloudmen were doing. They all had huge brushes in their hands, and they were splashing the paint onto the great curvy arch in a frenzy of speed, so fast, in fact, that in a few minutes the whole of the arch became covered with the most glorious colors. Reds, blues, greens, yellows, and purples. "It's a rainbow," everyone said at once. "They are making a rainbow." "Oh, isn't it beautiful? Just look at those colors." "Centipede," they shouted, "you must come up and see this." The centipede poked his head cautiously out of the tunnel entrance. "Well, well, well, I've always wondered how those things were made. But why all the ropes? What are they doing with all the ropes?" "Good heavens, they are pushing it off the cloud," cried James. "There it goes. They are lowering it down to the earth with ropes." "And I'll tell you something else," the centipede said sharply. "If I'm not greatly mistaken, we ourselves are going to bump right into it." "Bless my soul, he's right!" the old green grasshopper exclaimed. The rainbow was now dangling in the air below the cloud. The peach was also just below the level of the cloud, and it was heading directly toward the rainbow, traveling rather fast. "We are lost!" Miss Spider cried, wringing her feet again. "The end has come." "I can't stand it," wailed the earthworm. "Tell me what's happening." "We're going to miss it," shouted the ladybug. "No, we're not." "Yes, we are." "Yes, no, yes. Oh, my heavens. Hold on, everybody," James called out, and suddenly there was a tremendous thud as the peach went crashing into the top of the rainbow. This was followed by an awful splintering noise as the enormous rainbow snapped right across the middle and became two separate pieces. The next thing that happened was extremely unfortunate. The ropes that the Cloudmen had been using for lowering the rainbow got tangled up with the silk strings that went from the Peach to the seagulls. The Peach was trapped. Panic and pandemonium broke out among the travelers, and James Henry Trotter, glancing up quickly, saw the faces of 1,000 furious Cloudmen peering down at him over the edge of the cloud. The faces had almost no shape at all because of the long white hairs that covered them. There were no noses, mouths, no ears, no chins, only the eyes were visible on each face. 2 small black eyes glinting malevolently through the hairs. Then came the most frightening thing of all. One Cloudman, a huge, hairy creature who must have been 14 feet tall at least, suddenly stood up and made a tremendous leap off the side of the cloud, trying to get to the one end of the silk strings above the Peach. James and his friends saw him go flying through the air above him and above them, his arms outstretched in front of him, reaching for the nearest string, and they saw him grab it and cling to it with his hands and legs. And then very, very slowly, hand over hand, he began to come down the string. "Mercy! Help! Save us!" cried the ladybug. "He's coming down to eat us," wailed the old green grasshopper. "Jump overboard!" "Then eat the earthworm first," shouted the centipede. "It's no good eating me. I'm full of bones like a kipper." "Centipede," yelled James, "quickly! Bite through that string, the one he's coming down on." The centipede rushed over to the stem of the Peach and took the silk string in his teeth and bit through it with one snap of his jaws. Immediately, far above them, a single seagull was seen to come away from the rest of the flock and go flying off with a long string trailing from its neck. And clinging desperately to the end of the string, shouting and cursing with fury, was the huge hairy Cloudman. Up and up he went, swinging across the moonlight sky, and James Henry Trotter, watching him with delight, said, "My goodness, he must weigh almost nothing at all for one seagull to be able to pull him up like that. He must be all hair and air." The rest of the Cloudmen were so flabbergasted at seeing one of their company carried away in this manner that they let go of the ropes they were holding. And then, of course, down went the rainbow, both halves of it together, tumbling toward the earth below. This freed the Peach, which at once began sailing away from that terrible cloud. But the travelers were not in the clear yet. The infuriated Cloudmen jumped up and ran after them among the clouds, pelting them mercilessly with all sorts of hard and horrible objects. Empty paint buckets, paintbrushes, stepladders, stools, saucepans, frying pans, rotten eggs, dead rats, bottles of hair oil, anything those brutes could lay their hands on came raining down upon the Peach. One Cloudman, taking very careful aim, tipped a gallon of thick purple paint over the edge of the cloud right onto the centipede himself. The centipede screamed with anger. "My legs!" he cried. "They are all sticking together. I can't walk. And my eyelids won't open. I can't see. And my boots are ruined." But for the moment, everyone was far too busy dodging the things that the Cloudmen were throwing to pay any attention to Centipede. "The paint is drying," he moaned. "It's going hard. I can't move my legs. I can't move anything." "You can still move your mouth," the earthworm said, "and that is a great pity." "James," bawled the centipede, "please help me wash off this paint, scrape it off, anything." It seemed like a long time before the seagulls were able to pull the Peach away from that horrible rainbow cloud, but they managed it at last, and then everybody gathered around the wretched centipede and began arguing about the best way to get the paint off his body. He really did look a sight. He was purple all over, and now the paint was beginning to dry and harden. He was forced to sit very stiff and upright as though he were encased in cement, and all 42 of his legs were sticking out straight in front of him like rods. He tried to say something, but his lips wouldn't move. All he could do now was to make gurgling noises in his throat. The old green grasshopper reached out and touched him carefully on the stomach. "But how could it possibly have dried so quickly?" he asked. "It's rainbow paint," James answered. "Rainbow paint dries very quick and very hard." "I detest paint," Miss Spider announced. "It frightens me. It reminds me of Aunt Spiker, the late Aunt Spiker, because the last time she painted her kitchen ceiling, my poor darling grandmother stepped into it by mistake when it was still wet, and there she stuck. And all through the night we could hear her calling to us, saying, "Help, help, help." And it was heartbreaking to listen to her. But what could we do? Not a thing until the next day when the paint had dried. And then, of course, we all rushed over to her and calmed her down and gave her some food. Believe it or not, she lived for 6 months like that, upside down on the ceiling with her legs stuck permanently in the paint. She really did. We fed her every day. We brought her fresh flies straight from the web. But then on the 26th of April last, Aunt Sponge, the late Aunt Sponge, happened to glance up at the ceiling and she spotted her. "A spider!" she cried. "A disgusting spider! Quick, fetch me a mop with the long handle." And then, oh, it was so awful I can't bear to think of it. Miss Spider wiped away a tear and looked sadly at the centipede. "You poor thing," she murmured. "I do feel sorry for you." "It'll never come off," the earthworm said brightly. "Our centipede will never move again. He will turn into a statue, and we shall be able to put him in the middle of the lawn with a bird bath on top of his head. We could try peeling him like a banana," the old green grasshopper suggested. "Or rubbing him with sandpaper," the ladybug said. "Now, if he stuck out his tongue," the earthworm said, smiling a little for perhaps the first time in his life, "if he stuck it out really far, then we could all catch hold of it and start pulling. And if we pulled hard enough, we could turn him inside out and he would have a new skin." There was a long pause while the others considered this interesting proposal. "I think," said James slowly, "I think that the best thing to do—" Then he stopped. "What was that?" he asked quickly. "I heard a voice. I heard someone shouting." Chapter 30. They all raised their heads, listening. "Shh, there it is again." But the voice was too far away for them to hear what it was saying. "It's a cloud man," Miss Spider cried. "I just know it's a cloud man. They're after us again." "It came from above," said the earthworm, and automatically everybody looked upward, everyone except the centipede, who couldn't move. "Ouch," they said. "Help, mercy, we're going to catch it this time." For what they saw now, swirling and twisting over their heads, was an immense black cloud, a terrible, dangerous, thundery-looking thing that began to rumble and roar even as they were staring at it. And then from high on top of the cloud, the faraway voice came down to them once again, this time very loud and clear. "On with the faucets," it shouted. "On with the faucets! On with the faucets!" 3 seconds later, the hole underneath of the cloud seemed to split and burst open like a paper bag, and then out came the water. They saw it coming. It wasn't raindrops at all. It was a great solid mass of water that might have been a lake or a whole ocean dropping out of the sky on top of them. And down it came, down and down and down, crashing first into the seagulls and then onto the peach itself, while the poor travelers shrieked with fear and groped around frantically for something to catch hold of. The peach stem, the silk strings, anything they could find. And all the time, the water came pouring and roaring down upon them, bouncing and smashing and sloshing and slashing, and swashing and swirling and surging and whirling and gurgling and gushing and rushing, and it was like being pinned down underneath the biggest waterfall in the world and not being able to get out. They couldn't speak, they couldn't see, they couldn't breathe, and James Henry Trotter, holding on madly to one of the silk strings above the peach stem, told himself that this must surely be the end of everything, at last. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the deluge stopped. They were out of it, and it was all over. The wonderful seagulls had flown right through it and had come out safely on the other side. Once again, the giant peach was sailing peacefully through the sky. "I am drowned," gasped the old green grasshopper, spitting out water by the pint. "It's gone right through my skin," the earthworm groaned. "I always thought my skin was waterproof, but it isn't, and now look, I'm full of rain." Look at me," shouted the centipede excitedly. "It washed me clean. The paint's all gone, I can move again." "That's the worst news I've had in a long time," the earthworm said. The centipede was dancing around the deck and turning somersaults in the air and singing at the top of his voice. "Oh, hooray for the storm and the rain! I can move, I don't feel any pain. And now I'm a pest, and I'm the biggest and best, the most marvelous pest once again." "Oh, do be quiet," the old green grasshopper said. "Look at me!" cried the centipede. "Look at me! I am freed! I am freed! Not a scratch nor a bristle, not a scratch nor a bruise nor a bleed. They all thought they had scent. No, sorry. I'll start that one over. Look at me, I am freed, I am freed. Not a scratch nor a bruise nor a bleed. To his grave this fine gent they all thought they had sent, and I very near went, oh, I very near went, but they sent quite the wrong centipede. How fast are we going? Chapter 31. How fast are we going all of a sudden? The ladybug said. I wonder why. I don't think the seagulls like this place any better than we do, James answered. I imagine they want to get out of it as soon as they can. They got a bad fright in the storm we'd just been through. Faster and faster flew the seagulls, skimming across the sky at a tremendous pace, with the Peach trailing out behind them. Cloud after cloud went by on either side, all of them ghostly white in the moonlight, and several more times during the night, and the travelers caught glimpses of cloudmen moving around on the tops of these clouds, working their sinister magic upon the world below. Once they passed a snow machine in operation, with the cloudmen turning the handle and a blizzard of snowflakes blowing out of the great funnel above. They saw the huge drums that were being used for making thunder, and the cloudmen beating them furiously with long hammers. They saw the frost factories and the wind producers and the places where cyclones and tornadoes were manufactured and sent spinning down toward the earth. And once deep in the hollow of a large billowy cloud, they spotted something that could have only been a cloudman's city. There were caves everywhere running into the cloud, and at the entrances to the caves, the cloudmen's wives were crouching over little stoves with frying pans in their hands, frying snowballs for their husbands' suppers. And hundreds of cloudmen children were frisking about all over the place and shrieking with laughter and sliding down the billows of the cloud on toboggans. An hour later, just before dawn, the travelers heard a soft whooshing noise above their heads, and they glanced up and saw an immense bat-like creature swooping down toward them out of the dark. It circled round and round the Peach, flapping its great wings slowly in the moonlight and staring at the travelers. Then it uttered a series of long, deep, melancholy cries and flew off again into the night. Oh, I do wish the morning would come, Miss Spider said, shivering all over. Oh, it won't be long now, James answered. Look, it's getting lighter over there already. They sat in silence watching the sun as it came up slowly over the rim of the horizon for a new day. Chapter 32. And when full daylight came at last, they all got to their feet and stretched their poor, cramped bodies. And then the centipede, who always seemed to see things first, shouted, Look! There's land below! He's right, they cried. Hooray! It looks like streets and houses. But how enormous it all is! A vast city in the early morning sunshine lay spread out 3,000 feet below them. At that height, the cars were like little beetles crawling along the streets, and people walking on the pavements looked no larger than tiny grains of soot. But what tremendous tall buildings! Exclaimed the ladybug. I've never seen anything like them before in England. Which town do you think it is? This couldn't possibly be England, said the old green grasshopper. Then where is it? Asked Miss Spider. You know what those buildings are? Shouted James. Those are skyscrapers. So this must be America. And that, my friends, means that we have crossed the Atlantic Ocean overnight. You don't mean it, they cried. It's not possible. It's incredible. It's unbelievable. Oh, I've always dreamed of going to America, cried the centipede. I had a friend once who... Be quiet, said the earthworm. Who cares about your friend? The thing we've got to think about now is how on earth are we going to get down to earth? Ask James, said the ladybug. I don't think that should be so very difficult, James told them. All we have to do is cut loose a few seagulls. Not too many, mind you, but just enough so that the others can't quite keep us up in the air. Then down we shall go, slowly and gently until we reach the ground. Centipede will bite through the strings for us one at a time. Far below them, in the city of New York, something like pandemonium was breaking out. A great round ball, as big as a house, had been sighted hovering high up in the sky over the very center of Manhattan, and the cry had gone up that it was an enormous bomb sent over by another country to blow the whole city to smithereens. Air raid sirens began wailing in every section. All radio and television programs were interrupted with announcements that the population must go down into their cellars immediately. 1 million people walking in the streets on their way to work looked up into the sky and saw the monster hovering above them and started running for the nearest subway entrance to take cover. Generals grabbed hold of telephones and shouted orders to everyone they could think of. The mayor of New York called up the president of the United States down in Washington to ask him for help. And the president, who at the moment was having breakfast in his pajamas, quickly pushed away his half-finished plate of Sugar Crisps and started pressing buttons right and left to summon his admirals and generals. And all the way across the vast stretch of America, in all the 50 states from Alaska to Florida, from Pennsylvania to Hawaii, the alarm was sounded and the word went out that the biggest bomb in the history of the world was hovering over New York City and that any moment it might go off. That is all for today. Next time we'll pick up at chapter 34, James and the Giant Peach.